I can send you the video for the recording. This will be on interview questions for the report on effects for video games.
Okay, no problem. That's fine.
All right, sweet. So to start off, you are a teacher at Herman High who goes and does computer programming. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm the computer science teacher.
What made you want to choose that career?
So, long story short, back in college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to go into. I really wanted to go in and play college football, and so that was my main thing. And my parents said, "Well, you're going to be a doctor." So I started choosing pre-med, and I hated the blood associated with everything. So I ended up taking some elective classes to really see what I wanted, and I took a computer science class, and I just loved the programming end of it. And so I continued that and majored in it and got my degree in computer science and a degree in math. And I went to work for Microsoft for a couple of years and found that I didn't like sitting behind the desk all the time. So I decided I wanted to teach it and coach. And so that's kind of how I got into it, and I've been doing it ever since.
So with that decision point earlier on, when you went transition from medical field to computer programming, did you find was there a certain key point that you had passion for?
Well, yeah, I think so. When I was in high school, there were no computers in our school at the time, other than our English teacher, and we had to do a term paper, and so we had to do it on a typewriter. And he was adamant about the margins and everything being exactly the right width, or he'd toss it and you'd have to do it again. And so after fighting that, I found that he demonstrated with a computer, and all of a sudden that was just magical and it was easy to use, and that intrigued me. And that's what really made me take the elective at college. And when I took it, I found that since I love math so much, it involved a lot of math, and it was just the idea that, wow, I can actually solve problems with this and do a lot of things with it. And so I think it was just the idea that I always loved puzzles and problem solving, and that kind of spurred me to go that direction.
All right, sweet. So with all that later knowledge, and then would you say that when you said that your English teacher had taught you how to get margins and all that correct on a typewriter, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So with that ability, do you think that was something that later affected you to help with computer programming?
I think it did. I always, when I'm teaching my kids, I always say that, you go to a doctor and they help you figure out what's wrong with your body, because we don't know. And so you really respect them and you really trust them with it. And for a computer, it's the same thing. A computer scientist knows and understands what's going on with the computer, the hardware, the software, the network, etc. But a person generally in this world doesn't, even though we're becoming more technologically literate. In general, it's still a unique, or I guess a science that's not really understood. And so by me being able to share that knowledge and watch light bulbs turn on with my students, it's pretty exciting.
All right. With programming, we're gonna try and relate this to video games. Do you experiment with video games at all, or are you more like computer programming solely?
Yeah, I'm not a gamer at all. My son loves to game, and occasionally I'll play a game with him. When I was at Microsoft, I did write game software. I was one of the authors of a game called Flight Simulator way back when, and to realize that there's a whole lot difference. A lot of kids want to go into computer science because they think, well, I love video games, so I'm going to want to write video games. They're very different. Playing a video game is not even close to what it would be to write a video game. So it's a very different world. But that being said, I like the intrigue and the strategy behind certain games. I really don't like the fast-paced shooting up games. It almost gives me more stress than it does relaxation.
Understandable. What kind of experience did you have with the Flight Simulator project?
So I was on the user interface team. It was called the UI team, and my actual job was to design the cockpit dials and instruments and make them interact with how the plane was flying. So if it would go up or down, you would see the altimeter go up or down, or the throttle, et cetera, the rudders, and you would see all those things on the dials, and so it would interact with that. So that was my job with that program.
Did you find that this video game taught you a lot about an airplane? Like, it was very instructional?
Oh, yes, definitely, because we had Microsoft at the time would bring in some aeronautical engineers and teach how the physics of the plane worked. And so that wasn't really my job, but I did understand a lot after that because the people that were actually designing the flight characteristics of the plane, that was their job to really incorporate the physics of it into it. And then as the plane would change, then I would change the dials and things. So I learned how a plane flew, and that to me is what's cool about computer science. And I teach my students this, that you don't necessarily have to be an expert at every field. You might work in the medical industry, you might work in business or engineering, and somebody comes to you and explains they want this program to do this. They're going to give you the formulas, or in this case, the physics and et cetera, and you're just going to use and apply them to the programming language that you're using to develop the software with. So that's kind of where I've really enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot about a lot of different fields from that.
So with that, I'm assuming that, like you had said, with the instructor coming in, did you have to do a lot of like pre-knowledge research before you actually implemented it into the game, or was it more like not on the spot, but you kind of just went through the paces?
Yeah, so the team of programmers, and at that time there was, I think, 50 some, I don't remember the exact number, but there was about 50 some of us, and we watched planes fly, we watched them take off and land, we watched the characteristics of how a jet would fly versus a prop driven plane. We studied all those kind of things, and we would talk about them, and we'd take notes on them, and we did all of that so that we would have questions for the physics and the aeronautical engineers before they even came in. So it really was helpful up front. So I guess kind of getting your ducks in a row before you ever did it.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like with this game, you had a lot of experience with the pre-knowledge and then implementation into the game.
Yes, that's correct. Uh-huh.
What are some things that you like noticed personally? Was there a lot more? Was there things that like you found helpful in your daily life, or was there some things that just were kind of like helpful at just in the moment?
Well, yeah, in daily life, I think the biggest thing, not only with that particular piece of software, but in programming in general, it helps you to be very organized. And it helps you follow problem solving steps, which I think are the same steps that you'd follow in any problem that you're trying to solve in life. It doesn't have to be a computer program. You know, the first thing is you got to understand the problem. And then you got to think about how you're going to design a solution for it. And then if you're happy with that design, you've got to implement the solution. And then once you've implemented it, you got to test it. And so, yeah, that works in computer science. It works in engineering. And I usually use an example in my class, and I'll say it works in asking a girl to the prom. Okay, that's a problem. Well, how are you going to ask the girl to prom? Well, in today's day and age, it's some big ornate ordeal that you're going to do, but you're going to design it. Okay, I'm going to take balloons and I'm going to plant them all over the girl's yard, and one of the balloons is going to say, will you go to the prom with me? And then you realize, well, maybe she'll get sick of it and just throw them away and won't pop the balloon. So then you decide the design's different. You're going to just put one balloon on the door and tape it there and say, please pop this balloon. It has a question for you. And so you decide to implement it. So at midnight, you go over to the girl's house and you tape it to her door. And the next morning, hopefully she pops it and says, yes, that's implementing it. And then the test. So it works in any problem solving environment. So I think that's the key. It helped me design things and solve problems in daily life. And it helps me to be much more organized.
All right. Let's go take a step back and let's look at. You said you also played some. Well, maybe not played, but understood more strategy-based games. That you weren't really for the action games.
Hmm.
Was there when you play or just have knowledge of the strategy games? Do you feel like they are more helpful, or do you feel like more of they are of a kind of a nuisance problem or a weigh down?
Well, again, going back to why I probably went into computer science was I love puzzles and problems like that. And so I like chess and games like that. And playing those strategy games, it lets me sit back and try to analyze the situation and again get organized as to how I'm going to either defeat the computer or an opponent on it. So to me, those are pretty relaxing. And yet they intrigue me very much and they kind of excite me to the point of wanting to continue to play them. Um, I'm not really, again, we've moved more toward the massive online games, which are somewhat strategy, but they're real time. So again, you got to react and think quickly. And I like to kind of sit back and try to figure out what I want to do. And that's the kind of game I like. Whereas the other ones, no, they just add stress to my life. So my son likes those, but I'm not really a big fan of those.
All right, sweet. So one negativity I've found in my research is that a lot of people say that video games take up time, or time consumers, time wasters. As a teacher and as experienced in programming, do you find that happening in your classes?
Oh yeah, that's one of the difficult things that I have in my lab is because I have to keep the lab completely open to the internet, et cetera, for the kids to do research and gather information to solve their problems. You're going to have kids that will drift off and want a game on the web and et cetera. And so yeah, that's always a time waster. And so that is a definite negative effect of gaming is you can get so engrossed in the game you forget what you're doing. And my son, he loves to play that game Fortnite. And if I didn't stop him, he'd forget what time it was and he'd be playing it for 8-10 hours straight if I let him. And so yeah, it's very engrossing, very addictive, and that's a negative. Now on the flip side, I do think it could be a positive in the sense that, especially like right now where we're all cooped up and things, and it just gets us out of reality a little bit. And so by using that time, it gives us a chance to relax and get into another world and not think about what's going on in the real world. So that's on the flip side of it. So you can always think of a benefit, even though there's usually negatives to it as well.
So, in short, you feel that a positive side of video games is that it allows for taking a break, I guess, from the real world, and then on the negative side, you can lose track of the real world, so you can't focus as much.
Right, definitely, definitely.
So, would you feel that video games are a more positive or negative experience, just in general, nothing specific, just personal experiences that have led you to believe if they are a positive influence to help relieve stress or take a load off, or are they more of a negative because they distract a lot more than they should?
Yeah, that one's kind of a loaded question because it's like every coin has two sides,
Yeah.
and so for every negative, there's going to be positives. But in general, when I think of them as a positive, again they add creativity, they add imagination. They allow you to think and concentrate and focus in a certain vein. And it's very limited, but you can get there. I think that it does, again, when we talk about problem solving, it does develop some logic. And, in these quick games like Fortnite, you develop reflexes and hand-eye coordination. Another one I already mentioned, you can escape some reality probably. So those are some good things about them. Some bad things in my mind would be, again, they're really addictive. A lot of games can really cause time warps or time sinks for you where you just don't you even forget what's going on. There's a lot of arguments as to violent video games and what they do to people, and those arguments are not proven one way or another. You're going to read studies where some say, well, this guy has become a murderer because he watched video games or he played video games. I don't know if that's proven or not. I can tell my son, who's only 12, but when he plays video games too much, his behavior will change and he will become a little more antagonistic, and his attitude will change. So in my own case, I can see that. And I do think that when I look at a lot of kids that play too many video games, they tend to get to be a little bit more antisocial because they use the game as an escape. Before I came back to teach high school, I was a dean at a university. And when I would introduce the kids the first day of school to our university, I would say, okay, because it was a computer science school, and I would tell them, I don't want your best friend to be that laptop is in front of you. I want you to get friends, and I want you to be around people. And I think that can be a big issue when you get too involved in computer gaming. That computer becomes your friend and your buddy, and you start to lose that. Another adverse effect to me would be you're sitting on your butt there all the time playing the game, so you're not exercising, you're probably not eating right, you're losing good posture. So just physical things to your own body can be a problem. So I think those are both positive and negatives that you can weigh. And I think with each person, if you think about drinking, drugs, things like that, every person on the face of the earth is going to react differently to those. If you drink, maybe you're going to get drunk and sick real quick and somebody else isn't. Well, okay, that's the same case with gaming. Some people are going to be able to walk away and say, yeah, I like playing that, I'll play it again maybe in a month. Some kids are going to play it and then all of a sudden they're immersed and engrossed in it, and it's tough to get them away. So I think you got to treat every person differently as to how they expect that. I did some, with my doctorate degree, some of my research is how emotion can affect learning and how technology can be used to change that. And so that really went into, in many cases, emotions of what gaming does. And the biggest problem that gaming, it changes your cognitive ability a little bit by putting up walls. In other words, you start to play a game and your attitude changes a little bit because you're filtered a little bit more toward, I don't know, the game, I guess, itself. And you're thinking about everything in the real world is almost towards that game. So you put up these walls, and that blocks some constructive ideas. So, everybody, you've heard the term attitude is everything and things. Well, if you have an open-minded person, you have a good attitude, you're probably going to learn better. Well, if you're closed-minded, which in a case, some of this cognitive walls that you're putting up through gaming, that's going to limit your ability to have constructive arguments, to be open to new ideas, and things like that. And I've used my own son as a guinea pig in this research, and I can definitely see it over the course of the last 3 years doing it with him. So I hope that's kind of a long-winded answer, but
no, that works. That's awesome. One thing I just want to do is, if we zoom out, and yes, with the individual person to individual games, there are certain problems, but do you feel like there are certain genres of games that are inherently not worse, but a little bit better not played?
Yeah. So, and again, this probably an opinion is, I love those strategy type games, but games like Fortnite, to me, where you're just immersed in a world where you're reacting quickly to things and your brain is just going and you got total, mental stimulus all the time. I don't think those are real productive games. I think in the short term, they're okay for, hand-eye coordination, reflexes, things like that. But they're also addictive. And I do think that they really hurt us in the big picture if we do them too much. So those I do not like very much.
All right. So, with all this information we have about video game and that how there are some possible better solutions to it instead of like action strategy or simulations could be a little bit better. For any of those that do play video games out there, what are your recommendations to them?
So my recommendations would be to have a timer next to them that has an alarm, and they decide whether it's through their parents or on their own. They decide what's the best way to do this and how long should they do it. So for me, with my own son, he has to get his homework done every day and his exercising done and his chores around the house done before he could do that. And then he would be allowed 1 hour a day, except for on Sunday, he couldn't do it, but 1 hour a day to play it. And that worked pretty well while we were in the normal state. Now, right now, where we're in this pandemic, I don't really want him worrying about what's going on in the world. And so I'm pretty much right now, once he gets all of those things done, he can be on it, and it lets him forget about what's going on, and I don't have any real rules toward it. And that seems to be working okay. But I think that's the best advice I could give to anybody that's going to do these kind of games is to just moderation and know when to quit. Just have some definitive timeline of, here, I'm going to play this for 30 minutes. So I'm going to play it for 2 hours, whatever they decide they think is beneficial, and walk away and do something else, especially something that might be more physical.
All right, sweet. I'm out of questions. Is there anything that you would also like to state or help for any of those that are playing video games or are looking for a better video game to play?
Yeah, well, I guess the one thing, there's some games, especially in my own classroom, that play where there's the little guys that float across the screen. I don't know what the game's called. And when you absorb one of them, you get bigger. They're like worms or globes and things like that. And to me, I'm not really sure what the purpose with those games are. They are just really time killers. And I would try to tell kids to just avoid those kind of simple-minded things that are just time killers, because that's really what the kids are doing. They're just wasting time. There's more things productive. If you're going to play games like Fortnite and things like that, just remember what you're doing with them and that it is a game and that you got to limit your time. One of the problems I think with transferring from video games to reality is kids that play a lot of video games tend to start to realize, hey, games have reset. If I don't like how things are going, I can just hit reset and start over. Unfortunately, that does not happen in life. And if things don't go well, they start to get frustrated. And frustrating times for a kid can be very dangerous. And so they have a hard time transferring the video game world to the real world. And I really think that's a big issue with some of the problems that we've had with kids in the past. And so I think they need to learn to separate the two.
All right, sweet. Well, I think that will conclude this interview. I do just have to state for the record that with this interview, and if you're all right with it, I would love to put it into my research, that there is a legal document, but because of, this pandemic, if it's all right with you, and I'll be sending you a copy, I'm going to have to sign it here and then send that to my English teacher.
Sure. Right. Anything you need me to do, I'm fine with that.
Sweet. So I'll sign that here. I'll give you a copy. I'll send you a copy over email too, and then I'll also send you a copy of the video link if you want to look that over or have any questions with it.
All right, perfect. And Darian, if you have more questions later on, just holler. Happy to help you.
All right. You enjoy the rest of the day.
All right, you too, sir. Have a good one.